Hello everybody, we're going to do some puzzles now, and then we're going to try and do five puzzles, and try and get as good a score as we can. Don't forget because it's puzzles, the time's unlimited, so I'm going to try and use my time as best as I can and try and take you through my thought process. I'm going to look at the puzzles at the end and see, well, after we get each one wrong obviously, and then see where we went wrong and what we could have done better. Okay, so this is black to move. We've got to find the best move. So what's the first thing you do? I think one of the things where amateur players struggle, I talked a lot on the channel recently about amateur players and, their struggles or whatever, is they don't look enough at concrete checks and captures. So one move I'm thinking about obviously is to take the pawn, but then I'm thinking, well, if I take the pawn, where's that going to lead? Is that a good idea or not? Now another counter move I'm looking at is maybe moving the queen to h4, but when I check on h2, first thing to note is it's not going to be checkmate because they're going to go to f1. When you check on h1, well, firstly they can go to e2, but also they can take the queen with a knight on g3. So it might not be a good idea to play queen h4. So really, a lot of calculation is process elimination. You look at moves, you say, well, that move probably isn't very good. What move should I play instead? Now, after rook c3, I have noticed that they have got this move, rook takes c3. They've got a couple of moves that they could try. Firstly, they could try bishop b3 in the queen. But I'm not really sure what that achieves. You could take on f3, they take on c4, you could take on f2, they could take on c6, check. Also hit the bishop. You take on c4. If they take on d7, then you have rook d2. Very important move, I think. Both getting the rook off at the attack from the king on g1 and also attacking the pawn on d7. So rook c3, bishop b3, rook f3, bishop c4, rook f2 might be okay. If they ever take on c6, take on c4, they just take on f2. You should be doing well there. You could take back on c6 with a bishop. However, after rook c3, I'm noticing I have this move knight e4. With the idea, after rook takes f3, knight d6 check. When you move the king, they're going to take on c4. But then you take on f2. So I'm assuming it must be rook takes c3. I can't really see any other move. Yeah, so this is one line. Oh, actually, I didn't really consider that move. So taken on, that's clever. They're taken on c6. So a move that I never really considered. Okay, so now we need to calculate. Well, by far the most obvious move is to take on f3. The only other option is to take on c6, which is also a reasonable option. However, after bishop c6, again, knight e4 might be a bit of an issue. And then after rook f3, there's knight d6, knight takes c4. So I'm just wondering about that. Also, they can move a queen, maybe. Queen d1 is an option. Rook g3, bishop b3, winning the exchange. So the most obvious move is rook takes f3. When they take on d7, can I simply go rook d3? After bishop d3, queen d3, how are they going to defend the pawn? It looks problematic. However, after rook d3, you could argue that you're not threatening to take on d7 because of bishop b3 winning the queen. So maybe they queen. Yeah, it's a complicated position actually. Now, one other variation I'm looking at is rook takes f3, take on d7, rook takes f2. If they queen, then you take on c2 with the rook, say. Now, they've got a check on d7, but you go king g8, and after somebody like queen e8 check, you can go to h7, your king is defended. So I think it must be rook takes f3. They've just decided to take back, but actually that has some point behind it as well, because my initial gut feeling was to take back the bishop, but that's a blunder because of bishop b3. So the obvious question is, why can't I just go for queen takes c6, because then I don't lose any material, right? Probably it's queen take. I mean, there is queen h4, but queen h4 they can take on d7, queen g3, rook g2. And you can't both defend the queen and also attack d7 at the same time. So I'm going to go with queen takes and hope that that's good enough. And it is. Thank God for that. Right. Okay, so we've got the first one right. We move on to the second puzzle. So this is an endgame. Very important to do endgame studies, guys. So one obvious move is to push the pawn. Your first question is, you know, in an endgame, you should always be thinking about any endgame where you've got pawns, just push the pawn. If I push the pawn to d6... Now, they clearly can't take on d6 because a king f4 must be an easily won king and pawn endgame, 2 pawns up. However, they can go king e4 and after d7 play the bishop back to c7. But then if I just push h6, why is that not an easy win? So it feels like d6 a move. However, there are other moves that I must consider as well. Maybe a move after like d6, they could consider bishop e3, d7, bishop b6. Now, how do I win that position? Because if h6, bishop b6, sorry. So d6, bishop e3, d7, bishop b6, h6, I got king f6. Am I actually winning that? e5, king g6, e6, bishop d8. Something like that, right? King g4. No, sorry, king g4. I mean, let's say king f4. King takes h6, king e5. They've got bishop e7 to draw. I mean, d6 feels like the correct move, right? Because I don't really see... King f3 is possible. It feels a bit slow, so I'm assuming it must start with this. Yeah, that seemed like the best defense. Now, there is h6 immediately. There's h6, but h6 I can go king takes d6. h7, bishop d4, very important move. If king f5, then just bishop e5 must be a draw, right? So the obvious move is d7. Must be d7. Must start with this, surely. Okay, so this is where it gets tricky. Because... they want to go king e6 and take the d7 pawn. So you could look at a line like king g5, king e6, h6, king takes d7, h7, bishop d4. Looks like a draw again. So the obvious move is h6 because that more or less forces them to play king f6. Now maybe I'll bully my way in with something like h6, king f6, h7, king g7, force, king f5. Let's say king h7, king f6. Maybe that's winning. Because if I put the king on e8, I can just run the e pawn, right? I can run the e pawn, yeah. So I'm thinking it's h6, right? And now I wanted to go... I think e5 is a mistake because king g6. And then e6 I got bishop d8. So I'm going to start with this move. And now I'm going to try and bully my way in with a king, like king f5. Now I'm thinking king f6 because I don't want to allow them to get the g7 square. Like king e6, king g7, king d6, bishop d8, e5. King f8. So I've got to keep the king out of g7. So I'll start with king f6. And now I'll go king e7. And then when they go... If I just put the king on e8, it's a forced win because I can go e5, e6, e7. And I can never go bishop c7 takes e5 because I always queen the pawn. So I'll start with this. And now... Oh, hang on. That's a tricky move actually because if I queen... However, I could put the pawn on e6 now, because if I go e5, if they go king g6, I go e6, they go king f5 hitting the pawn, I could go king f7 threatening e7. So I think e5 is the move, right? Now e6, I'm thinking. Again, I don't want a queen because I'm going to lose the e pawn at the end. I don't want to go king e8 because king f5's. Now I should be winning because I could go king e8. And when they go back, then you go e7. Now just queen the pawn, right? Okay, so I got that one in the end. It was a lot of moves, though. It was a lot of moves. But it was all fairly forcing and straightforward. Right, let's carry on. So I got 2 out of 2 so far in my 5 puzzle game challenge, right? But it's very tough. Okay, there's several candidate moves that come to mind here. One is queen takes a3, weirdly, even though that looks crazy. Because the point is that when they take, after rook takes, you're threatening to mate on a1. Now they can go c3, but it allows all sorts of moves like rook takes b3, which I'm thinking might well be good for black. But again, might not be. So we have to be very precise here. There's also bishop f5, there's rook a8, rook c a8. If they take on e6. So you're always looking for like forcing moves, checks and captures in positions like this. Queen d2, rook d2 doesn't feel like anything. Bishop b2, queen a5. It feels like it has to be queen a3, weirdly. You know. And more or less they're going to be forced to go c3 at the end, I would imagine. I mean, they could go bishop g7, but then you could go queen a2. So I'm thinking it's probably queen takes. Right, now rook takes. Yeah, this is the critical line. So now you have to really come up with a good solution. So if I go rook... Okay, so my candidate moves here are rook takes b3, bishop f5, rook c a8. Now rook b3 is possibly the move you look at first. It's most forcing. I mean, you do have to... Okay, first you just think about the material balance. At the moment, black's only got one piece for the queen. So we kind of have to give checkmate, don't we? Like, winning back some material might not be enough. Like, rook b3, queen b2, bishop f5, say, and then take on b2. We're just going to be the exchange down. But that's actually not that clear because... we have a lot of activity. So if we're only exchange down and yeah, we've got a lot of pawns and a lot of pressure on c3. So rook b3 is definitely a counter move. Is there anything else? There might... That's why I think it's a good idea to look for candidate moves that you might not have seen initially. Because you don't want to overthink it. But at the same time, you might, you see an idea and it's strong. But then if you see another idea, it might just win the game straight away. So that's often where the advice came from. I think it was Edward Lasker, a famous just world champion Lasker, who said, if you see a stronger move, look around, you might see something even stronger. If you see a good move, look around, you might see something even stronger. Bishop f5, king b2, I don't see... Oh, but then rook a8 is interesting, right? Because then I'm threatening mate. So this is actually quite tricky now. Do I go rook b3? Also, rook b3, I'm worried about king c2, say. Because rook c3, queen c3. And then there's knight b4. Yeah, this is tricky, actually. I think the reason this is probably the toughest one yet is the fact that there's so many moves in this position. So I'm kind of narrowing it down to bishop f5 and rook. And I don't think it's rook c a8. I can rule that move out. I think they could just take on e6, and you are too much material down there. If you don't give checkmate, you're just going to lose, or you say you're not going to win. So I'm between bishop f5, king b2, rook c a8. Looks very tempting because how do they stop this threat of rook a2? They're actually threatening mate. Bishop f5, they do have bishop d3. However, after rook b3 there, maybe I'm doing well. I'm not sure. Although again, they could go king a2 there. It's not 100%. So this is why we really need to put the time in. This is where I sometimes struggle, and also in actual games where I've got a choice of moves and my calculation often gets a bit confused. So rook b3, king c2. Yeah, I'm not sure what the move is there. So bishop f5, bishop d3. What's the difference? Yeah, rook b3, king c2 then doesn't work because of knight d4 check. So I'm thinking bishop f5 initially. It was bishop f5. Phew. Yeah, I'm sure that's winning because bishop d3, rook b3, right? It's taking a while to load. Because I was thinking that move, but then they can go here. It's not the only move, but yeah, like knight d4, they'll just take with a queen probably, and then bishop d4, they can take on b3. And you're not winning, you're losing, in fact. So, but if you go here first, if they go bishop d3, you go rook a8. So I'm thinking like bishop. Yeah, I mean, practically speaking, bishop d3 is probably the move that they would play in a game, right? But then after this, oh, okay, this is not good. Also good, right? Yeah, okay. I didn't see bishop takes and knight b4, which I should have seen actually. But even if you just see that this line is good, what about this move taking immediately? Yeah, it's not so clear. It's definitely not as clear. Okay, let's try two more. Okay. So this is white to play and win. We're doing well today. Got 3 out of 3 so far. Okay, what are counter moves? One counter move again, you're looking at a capture. Looking at this, you're looking at this. What is the correct way to play? I think it's a very good idea for amateur players to do these puzzles. You know, do these puzzles every day. I'm lazy though. I know I should be doing these puzzles every day. I don't because I get lazy. You know, and that kind of costs me a little bit, right? Okay, there's one line I'm looking at which is Queen h5. One thing you do, you try to look for what's wrong with a variation as well. You know, I've mentioned this before, which is like a falsifying technique. So you identify a counter move, and you look for what's wrong with it, and by doing that, you can use process elimination. So let's say, for example, Queen h5. Well, one way I could easily falsify that maybe is simply knight f6. Because, like, what's your follow-up? You have to play a slow move like Queen h3, and then I've got moves like g6 or bishop c8. In fact, I can take on e5. So that, well, there is bishop d4 there, but I can always give out the exchange like rook d4. So Queen h5, knight f6, Queen h3. Queen takes e5, bishop d4. Rook takes d4, e d4, queen d4, king h1. It's just favouring black, like winning for black. g6 is just very strong. Like anything, any move is strong. So queen h5 I can rule out. Okay, but bishop h7 is more of a test because bishop h7, king h7, queen h5, king g8. Knight f7, for example, is a move. But then they could go, possibly not rook f7, because I'd imagine you just have a big attack, but I'm worried about the move knight f6. Because after queen h8, they've got king takes f7. Now, after knight f6, I could maybe think about knight h6 check. Gh6, queen g6, king h8. Do I have enough there? I'm not sure if I do. Queen h6, knight h7, bishop d4 is probably going to be met with rook d4 again. Rook f8, bishop f8. Hitting the queen on h6. It feels like the first move must be bishop takes. Okay, I'm going to try bishop takes because it's got to be the first move. It's not the first move. Okay, the first one I got wrong. Right. That's a shame. That's a shame. Yeah, so this is often a mistake you make is in calculation is where you think a move must be intuitively correct. You don't find a calculation to back it up, but you do it anyway because you're lazy. In my case, I think that's probably the best way to describe it. you know, and you're like, well, that must work. Even though you see what's wrong with it, you still play it, that's bad calculation in my opinion. Now, I think it's partly down to laziness, fatigue, maybe the fact I've done 3 puzzles already. Okay, there is another move I'm thinking about now, which is knight takes f7. And if they go rook takes, you have bishop e6. So okay, I've got it wrong anyway. Let's just try that move. Yeah. So is it this now or is it this? Now here I'm also thinking they can actually block the attack. So maybe it's simply this. Yeah, it was simply this. It's actually not that difficult when you probably, but even here you could get it wrong, right? Bishop g6 is a move. Rook takes here is a move. Just wondering what the move is here. Maybe it is bishop g6. No, it's rook takes. And then it's what, queen h5? Yeah, it's not that difficult, but I got 2 moves wrong in that. So that was, so let's, okay, we've got an endgame now. So the point of this endgame is you want to go king e2, but they got counterplay with moves like a g6 takes h6, right? So let's say I went king e2 and they went g6 or another line they could go king e2 h6, threatening g6, right? Bishop f7 then d5, bishop takes, then g6, but then you can always go bishop g8. But they've still got the c pawn as well, so it gets a bit confusing. So the question is whether your f pawn is going to get there before they do something else. This is actually quite a confusing position. Because not only do you have to calculate their d pawn moving up the board in a lot of variations, you also have to calculate their c pawn coming up the board, so it's quite a difficult position. So do you play me like bishop f7 first, or do you just start with king e2? Like king e2, I'm going to start with king e2 because I've got lazy again. Okay. So the obvious move is just to take, but again that might not be correct. And one of the advantages of going, say, h6 is they can't distract you. You're tightly controlling that diagonal, right? Now h6 does allow bishop f8, so let's calculate h6, bishop f8, king takes, bishop h6. They're not going to be able to stop your f pawn, I don't think. You could go king g2, bishop g5, f2, h6, your queen. And then when I go h7, are you winning that? It feels like you must be winning that, right? Again, not sure, but I feel like maybe it's just h6. Because if you take, they go h6, you go back, bishop g8. They go d5. You go king f2, they go d6. You move the king, they go d7. They're gonna queen fairly quickly. And bishop g8 is going to suffer from the same problem. So it might actually be, weirdly enough, might be h6. Now I want to take on f2, right? Yeah, this is the tricky move because where do I actually put the king? Because it feels like I could put the king anywhere, right? Does it matter where I put the king? Right, king g2, but let's say king g2, bishop g5. And then you push f2. So the 2 moves I'm looking at, it can't be king f1 because that blocks the f pawn. I don't think it's going to be king e1 because that allows bishop g5, bishop h4, right? It's not going to be king g1 again, I don't think. But it could be king g1, but that looks a bit weird. So the 2 moves I'm in an iron between are king e2 and king g2. But I'm not sure which one to go with. So let's say I went king e2 and they went, let's say bishop f4, f2, they go h6, you queen, you go h7. It's actually quite hard to stop the pawn then. And give checkmate. Like, how do you give checkmate to the white king? Even though king's on a3, it's not actually like a checkmate position. So the only other thing I'm thinking is if I went king g2 and they went, like, say, bishop f4 and I went f2 and they went h6 and I queened and they went h7. But I haven't really got time to go, like, say, bishop d5, they queen and I go queen c4 because they got queen h2 check. So king e2 looks like the most natural move. Again, might be wrong, but I don't see how they can stop the pawn. Now I push. So I did get that one right. So 4 out of 5, not bad, right? I'm now moved up to 2760 with puzzles. I only got one wrong. I was kind of guessing on that last one a little bit, to be honest. I think the calculations started to get a bit tired towards the end. That's one of the problems you have as an older player. You start to get a bit more tired. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, so what happens here is you just queen, right? And apparently this is just winning. In fact, although they will queen, yeah, that's why it's very important not to have the king on g2 where they've got counterplay with queen h2 check. Like a3, of course you'd queen here, this is stupid, right? But the checks will run out, and then your queen, you'll have 2 queens, right? So very important you have the a2 pawn at the end. But you go back to that position of g5, no, king e2, g6. The position I was thinking about was here, that if I went there, that wouldn't have been as good, yeah. Check. Yeah, I can't stop these pawns, and apparently I've got to settle for a draw. Got to try and give a perpetual now. Just got to settle for a draw. So little details in these positions matter a lot. So I think that's one of the things you can work on with calculation. Do these studies, think a lot about checks and captures, get yourself training, and look for the little details. And also use those techniques, like I said, like falsification, process elimination. Bear in mind that look for candidate moves. If you see something wrong with a line, you have to trust your instincts, which I didn't do in the previous puzzle and ended up getting it wrong. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Please like and subscribe. Sorry about the lighting in here. The lighting's not very good. The problem is if I open the window, open the curtain, then it's not too bad now. It was too sunny earlier, so that's why I shut the curtain. But anyway, thanks for watching, everybody.